Which Denver Broncos rookies will have the biggest impact this upcoming season? Could there be a scenario where certain rookies don't see much playing time on offense or defense, respectively? We'll dive deep into this conversation and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Which Denver Broncos rookie will have the biggest impact this upcoming season? What type of roles might they have? Could there be a scenario where certain players maybe don't see as much time as we envisioned when they were drafted? We'll dive deeper into that on today's brand new episode of Locked on Broncos. Real quick, thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, my good friend, Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL, and they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. Sayre, let's open things up as we get closer and closer to NFL training camp. It still feels a little bit far away, but we have content for Broncos Country that nobody else is talking about here, and we're going to build it up. And really looking at the state of the roster, man, I think we got to take a look at the rookies this upcoming year, maybe take some of the things we've seen and observed at OTAs, minicamp, and maybe ask the question, what type of role, what type of impact will some of these rookies have this upcoming season? Now that we've had a little bit of football acclimation here by them, let's start off with Marvin Mims. Now, Sayre, I think it's worth noting here, this is an interesting one because Mims has been dealing with a little bit of an injury. We don't know exactly what it is. We can only speculate what it appears to be, but didn't participate during OTAs or minicamp. Definitely a cause for concern that he missed out on that, but Sean Payton said he's not concerned, that he believes that those guys, he's mentally sharp alongside another guy we'll talk about in Drew Sanders a little bit later on here in the show. But for Marvin Mims, looking at where he's at right now, are we concerned with this injury that has been impacting him? And if not, what type of impact do we think he can have this upcoming season?
I think the reason that we don't need to be concerned about Marvin Mims at this point, Cody, is really the fact that the Broncos seem to be getting healthier at the wide receiver position elsewhere, right? And the surprise was kind of KJ Hamler maybe having a bit of an accelerated timeline as of OTAs, which is great to see. There was some thought that, man, you get injured in March, you could miss 6 months. That could put him out at the beginning of the regular season. But now, after I read an article from Mike Kliss, Cody, talking about could this be the last dance like we saw from Tim Patrick, he was including KJ Hamler among that mix of Sutton, Patrick, Judy, and Hamler together, and kind of talking about it like Hamler is part of the plans this year, or it's likely that he is, and we'll kind of see what happens at training camp. So I don't think there's any reason to worry about Marvin Mims at this point, and really it stems from the fact that you already have guys at the wide receiver position that you can count on. The Marvin Mims pick was really, it was really about getting that speed and making sure you always have speed available in the lineup at receiver, but also looking ahead to 2024, right? The wide receiver position, you need to get a guy acclimated to the NFL as quickly as possible because, well, you're probably planning on some pretty big changes happening at that position as early as 2024. So I would say, as far as what were people's expectations for Marvin Mims going into the season, or what are our expectations, right? I think it's a perfect time right now to reevaluate after the draft and say, man, he could be a guy that gives you 20 yards a catch in his rookie season. And I don't think that's changed, right? I think the injury that he's dealing with in the offseason, it's not like Greg Dulcich last year, Cody, where kind of we're hoping he could go in and be a starter at the tight end position right away. Marvin Mims is the type of player that it's like, well, could he be the number one punt returner? Yeah, absolutely. He could be. He's one of a few options. Could he be a factor in the offense? Yeah, he could be. But it's not the necessity, I feel like, what it was with Greg Dulcich last year at tight end, which kind of takes away that worry, in at least for me.
No, I think that's a valid point to make, right? Because if Denver suddenly didn't have wide receivers and you were counting on Mims in a big capacity, Yeah, I think there would be a little bit of concern there. But look, he's in a position where he can continue to learn and evolve here in the NFL, carry over his game from the college game to the NFL level. You get to do it with a good coach in Sean Payton. You get a wide receiver coach in Kerry Colbert, who has a ton of experience, more recently coaching at USC and now coming into the NFL, coaching here for the Denver Broncos. I think the thing with Mims is you're right. Like, Sayre, I could see a scenario where he does average, let's say, 18, 20 yards per catch this season. But maybe his volume won't be massive, right? Let's go back to last year with KJ Hamler downfield. I mean, you look at KJ, every catch that he hauled in was usually around the realm of 45 to maybe 50 yards in totality downfield. You can have that threat, right? Marvin Mims can still have a big impact on the Broncos offense even if he's not in the top 4 of wide receivers in terms of snap counts and reps and on-field. He can be a weapon for you. And I think that is something that we have to highlight here, because I think the expectation, look, you draft him in round 2, everyone's like, all right, hey, he's going to be an instant plug and play in the offense. It very well could be, right? He could very well have a major role in the offense. But what if he doesn't? What if he's just a role player right now and will continue to evolve? I would not be surprised if that's the route that we see taken here by the Broncos. And there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have picked him in round 2. You have to consider the environment around him, right? You got to healthy Cortland Sutton, healthy Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick's coming back. You have KJ in the mix as well. Marquez Callaway with some valid experience here in the NFL. You're in a good position to learn from some of these guys in the process. So now I think it also maybe goes to the point you mentioned about maybe being the top return option. If he is, in fact, the Broncos' best option in the return game at punt return or kick return, he can still have a big role. He can have a massive impact for the Broncos in that particular field. And then I think it also kind of balances out, because if he's not playing a lot of snaps necessarily in terms of volume in comparison to other guys, yeah, you can play him on offense, but you can also get a lot of run out of him on special teams, which is a good thing to have happen when you have a guy who has the dynamic return ability such as he. But this is all just speculation at this point. Obviously, there's going to be training camp. There's going to be various position competitions there in a deep, loaded wide receiver room. In the return game as well, there is competition aplenty. And we'll see if Marvin Mims steps back into the mix here, comes into training camp. We'll see if he's ready to go after dealing with the injury that he's been dealing with throughout minicamp and organized team activities. Aside from that as well, one thing I want to ask you is, is there a realm, in your opinion, that exists where you have KJ Hamler and you have Marvin Mims? You can use both these guys with their dynamic speed presence downfield in this offense.
I think so. And that's what gets me the most excited. That's why I'm saying let's not give up on KJ Hamler just yet. Let's, if we can, have a bit of an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver, because when's the last time the Broncos had that? I think every offseason we have this conversation, and with people in the comments or on Twitter, Cody, and it's like the Broncos have so many wide receivers, this and then we get to the season and we end up seeing all the then we don't. And then it's the back end guys playing. So I say let's get into the regular season with an actual embarrassment of riches at the position. I think back to 2008, Cody. Remember the Broncos in 2008? They drafted Eddie Royal round 2 out of Virginia Tech. And he was kind of expected similar things coming into his rookie season as what Marvin Mims is, where, hey, you're going to bring speed to our offense and you're going to be our punt returner. I don't think Marvin, I don't know. Maybe is that his ceiling? That would be like if somebody gets hurt and he's got to play, right? I mean, if he has
and
to
he
play
exploded in game 1 against the Raiders.
The Raiders, who are our week 1 opponent this year. I'll never forget it. That was when I first started writing about the Broncos on Bleacher Report, just doing it for fun. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. I can write about Eddie Royal having a breakout game and just crushing the Raiders. By the way, we'd love to see the Broncos get back to that, although I'm glad they're no longer playing the Raiders on a baseball field these days. So, but Cody, I think if you look at Eddie Royal in his rookie season, for those who remember it, that might be if Marvin Mims is pressed into full-time action. He has to play a lot. He has to be a top 3 receiver on this team. I think that Eddie Royal 2008 rookie season is kind of the cap for what I would be looking at in terms of involvement in the offense, involvement as a return man, and really being one of the go-to guys in the offense. But I think best case scenario, you don't have to involve him that heavily right away, because you want to see Sutton, you want to see Patrick, you want to see a lot of Jerry Jeudy, you want to see KJ Hamler coming back, we want to see a bit of Marquez Callaway, we want to see Dulcich involved in the pass game. I think the ceiling is the Royal 2008 season, but ideally you don't have to involve him that much.
Well, Broncos Country, we're eager for your thoughts on this as well. Could Marvin Mims maybe be an Eddie Royal lookalike here this upcoming season in terms of role and also impact and production? Let us know in the comments down below. We're going to continue this conversation about which Broncos rookies could have the biggest impact. We'll take a look at two players on the defensive side of the ball. You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Bird Dogs. And Bird Dogs, they have a wide variety of different comfort styles, whether you like joggers, whether you like shorts, whether you like liners in your shorts or your joggers, or whether you don't. You have every option at your disposal with Bird Dogs. Last year, Bird Dogs, they sent me some khaki-style joggers that I use sometimes in business casual. I can go to the office wearing them. Or if I just want to lounge around the house and have something comfortable and convenient, that's perfect as well. The shorts that they sent me are also a great combination of being able to go to the gym, work out in them, or I just want to go on a walk around the apartment complex in which I live, take my dog on a walk. It's comfortable. You can sleep in them. They almost serve like an extra set of pajamas if you want that as well. This year, they sent me two pairs of shorts that I absolutely love. They both came with liners, and they're super comfortable. They're fit perfect to my waistline, and I think I like about it as well, it's super soft and silky smooth. That is what you get when you get Bird Dogs. I want you to try it out here today. It's perfect for any type of weather. And you can also choose your inseam length if that's something that you're interested in. They have various color schemes and fit options, which fit better than their competitors by a mile. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that over here, the Locked On Broncos podcast.
The Denver Broncos got a couple of defensive players in round 3 of the 2023 NFL draft. But the question is, how much are we going to see Drew Sanders and Riley Moss in year 1? What kind of impact can those guys make? I know there's been, some things floated out there that they could play quite a bit, including by myself regarding Riley Moss, maybe potentially contending for a starting cornerback job. But we'll kind of have to wait and see what training camp brings, Cody. After seeing minicamp and OTAs, I remember at the rookie minicamp, Drew Sanders was really making some headlines. What did you see out there from these guys as far as, hey, this guy could be making this type of impact in his rookie season from both Riley Moss and Drew Sanders, the Broncos' third-round picks in 2023?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because we need to figure out the answer to, what is the Broncos' plans defensively in terms of starters? What is the plan on special teams for some of these guys? And look, you're taking over. You're trying to revamp the special team side. You need guys who can excel at it, guys who excelled at the college level. Riley Moss being one of them, Drew Sanders being another one of those guys there. I think it's important that you ingrain these guys. You and I think on an episode of Locked On Broncos last week, we discussed about them being core 4 players here on special teams. I honestly believe if they can carve out a role, which I think that more than likely that is the vision for them, they will play core 4 in terms of special teams. But how do they get on the field defensively? Let's say if, Patrick Surtain and Damarri Mathis, two guys who are projected to start at the cornerback position, are in the mix there and healthy this entire season. Then you have at the linebacker position, you have Alex Singleton and you have Josey Jewell, who are also the projected starters returning from last year. How do you get on the field on defense if you're Drew Sanders or if you're, a guy like Riley Moss? I think it's an interesting question because not only, does Riley Moss maybe have to compete a little bit against Damarri Mathis in terms of maybe trying to get some playing time. He's got Jaquan McMillan chomping at his heels a little bit as well. I will say this, though. With Riley Moss, he was the one rookie player outside of Alex Forsyth who was on the field, who didn't miss any time during OTAs or during minicamp. And I think that's a very, very promising sign there. Obviously we know that Drew Sanders, Marvin Mims, who we had just talked about, and JL Skinner, these guys have all been dealing with some injuries throughout minicamp and OTAs. So hopefully they're all ready to go once training camp rolls around. But for Riley Moss, yeah, I think special teams is where he's going to cut his teeth. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because I think we look over the course of time. Can you think of some players at the top of your head that maybe played a prominent role on special teams before they got snaps on defense? Kayvon Webster is one guy that comes to mind, a guy who cut his teeth as being a special teams ace. Then when he got on the field defensively, it was like he earned it. Remember Shelby Harris? Shelby Harris was a special teams guy, and then he blocked a Yangwei coup kick on Monday Night Football against the Los Angeles Chargers, and all of a sudden he became a household name. He started getting in the defensive rotation. Wesley Woodyard was a key special teams guy before he ever became a starting linebacker for the Broncos. I think you look at both of these players here, Sayre, they don't necessarily have to start or play a high volume of snaps here as rookies, I think, for them to be good picks. I think if they can contribute and help the Broncos special teams get better, and then when they get called up and play some reps on defense in case someone goes down with an injury, or if they're playing at such a level, they're like, hey, we can put this guy in this package. To me, I think that's a win. I think the expectation sometimes for rookies is come in, produce high numbers right away, and prove that you're a good pick, regardless if you're picked in round 5, 6, 7, or undrafted there. To me, I think we have to be realistic. Denver's got some depth right now at both of these positions, and it's not necessarily a bad thing if these guys don't start or play much on the defensive side of the ball right away.
It's probably actually a really good thing, isn't it? I mean, we want to see the draft picks play. When the Broncos invest in a guy in the draft, you want to see them play. You want to see them make an impact. I get that totally. And I want to see it as well. But I think it almost might be best case scenario if this rookie class doesn't have to play right away. And that's like the anti-excitement, right? Like we're in the off season, we're in June, we're talking about what kind of impact could these rookies make. Maybe the best impact they make is a few plays on special teams, and maybe they're contributing as role players. But like best case scenario for the Broncos is they stay healthy. Their guys, their other young players really progress. And I know we're going to talk about Damarri Mathis on another episode as we talk about second year guys. But Cody, like for the Broncos, isn't it the best case scenario that every guy that they already have penciled in the starting lineup at these respective positions, linebacker and cornerback, where these two guys play, you want to see progression from those position groups. And you want it to be the case where it's like, man, Riley Moss is really good. We got to find a way to get him on the field, but we can't take Damarri Mathis off. So maybe it's a case where like, do they get down to the numbers game at the end of training camp? And would they possibly put players like Josey Jewell or K'Wan Williams on the trade block if these guys are playing so well that they just can't keep them off the field? And they're like, all right, we had a plan, we had a vision for these guys to be starting by 2024, but they're too good to keep off the field right now. So we have to find a way to get them on. I think that's really the I wouldn't call that the best case scenario, but I would say if you're really wanting these guys to make an impact in year one, that might be the best case scenario, is to get to training camp, get to the end of the preseason. And these guys have looked so good. They've made every play. They've been making headlines at almost every practice. They've looked so good that you can't not trade Josey Jewell or K'Wan Williams to try and find a way to get them on the field. And I think that includes, keeping Damarri Mathis in the lineup. I don't think it's necessarily best case scenario if Riley Moss, takes over his position. And I think you want to see Mathis progress. You want to see him get better. So that's really, yes, we want the team to be mostly homegrown. You want the Broncos to draft well. You want them to hit on a high rate of draft picks. You want the most athletic guys on the field. But at the same time, is it best for the team if these guys are playing right away? I think there's different, you got to be careful about which way you spin that, because on the one hand, it's saying, well, yeah, we want the rookies to be good. On the other hand, it's kind of like, well, we want this guy to take a step back. And that's not necessarily what I think should be the desire necessarily of the fan base.
I think it's a great point, right? Because I think in draft cycles, players, that get selected, you start to look deeper into them on film. You're like, I really like this guy. But, you don't want to rob Paul to pay Peter, right? And at the expense of getting rid of one guy so another guy can play. It's not necessarily something I think that would be valued in the NFL, even though we know it is a business, especially if teams can save money. But I think that you look at this, it's a great opportunity for these guys to learn even more. Like Drew Sanders can benefit so much from learning from Josey and Alex Singleton, even though he's got these highly athletic traits and just tools to him that when you watch him, you're like, man, this guy can be really special. And then you look at Riley Moss as well. He can learn from a very, very good secondary room that features Justin Simmons, Patrick Surtain, Kareem Jackson, just the experience, and Christian Parker. He can continue to develop. I think that expectations are always high for young guys and for rookies. And I think a lot of it's based on maybe draft position. But I always encourage people to look deeper into the realm of football that, hey, doesn't matter if you're drafted round 1, doesn't matter if you're drafted round 2 or undrafted. It's about what you do with the opportunity. And I think more so now in recent years, we've been reminded of that deeply here as we cover this football team. In Broncos Country, what are your thoughts on Drew Sanders and Riley Moss in terms of what are your expectations for them this upcoming season? Do they need to play a lot to satisfy maybe how you feel about them as draft picks? Let us know in the YouTube comments down below. You can tweet us on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. Our conversation continues here as well as we take a look at the other rookies on this class, some of the late round picks in J.L. Skinner and Alex Forsyth. What type of impact might they have? What is the projected role for them? And is there some concern that maybe one or both these guys may not even make the active roster? We'll dive deeper into that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast where you get all the latest information going on from the local experts on the biggest stories surrounding everything in the National Football League. You get it every single day, wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. Check it out today, the Locked On NFL podcast. Could J.L. Skinner and Alex Forsyth be on the back end of the Broncos roster as we approach training camp? Is there any concern about the depth that the Broncos have at safety? And with Skinner dealing with an injury, will that hold him out or will that impact him negatively once training camp rolls around? Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much. And shout out to all the everydayers out there. It means the world that you take time out of your day to listen or to watch us break down all things orange and blue here on the show. As we go through these rookies, once again, bringing it up. It doesn't matter if you're undrafted, 6th round, 7th round. What type of impact can you have? What can you do that maybe separates yourself from the pack? And let's start off with J.L. Skinner here. Sayre, I know we talked about maybe players we want to see step up. I know we talked about Damarri and Turner-Yell in terms of maybe players who are question marks right now, who have the biggest odds of making the roster. And as OTAs and minicamp went through, we didn't see much of J.L. Skinner, obviously a 6'4" thumper out of Boise State. Does that negatively impact him? Like for the Broncos saying the things that they saw in him, I don't necessarily believe that that's a bad indictment on him, but I think there is a risk that is maybe being run here that, hey, if he is banged up throughout training camp and is unable to participate at, much in camp or in the preseason, does he go on an injured list there? Or do they cut him? Kind of similar to what happened last year with draft pick Faion Hicks. He didn't make the active roster. He got cut and then brought back to the practice squad. But does this hurt him by not being out there?
I think in a way it does, right? You want to make sure these guys are getting as many on-field reps as possible. And really, when you talk about this numbers game for the roster, that's where the J.L. Skinner discussion really becomes fascinating, because how many defensive backs are the Broncos going to keep? Are they going to keep 10? Are they going to keep 11? I guess I don't know exactly where they stand with that and whether or not they keep a third quarterback. That indirectly or maybe slightly directly could impact J.L. Skinner's chances of making the team, right? Because when you keep a third quarterback, there's now a domino effect on the rest of the roster. And if the Broncos decide to keep 3, that will affect every other position group on the team. It's going to affect your numbers game, and it's going to mean that all the guys that are competing 1 through 53, especially the guys who are like 48 to 53, they are going to have to stand out in some possible way. We're not talking about J.L. Skinner as a third-round pick and somebody the Broncos were like, we freaking loved his college tape. And I mean, everything about this guy, the mental makeup, the physical makeup, everything, we believe he was worth a top 100 pick, regardless of the pectoral injury that kept him out of the combine, right? That's not the case. We're talking about a 6th round pick. We're talking about every NFL team passed on J.L. Skinner up until the 6th round. And that's not to say we're not excited about the talent that he brings to the table, or the fact of having a 6'4" safety out there who can just run like a missile towards the line of scrimmage and make impact hits, especially on special teams too. He can make an impact there, but you have to be able to see it. You can't just say, well, this 6th rounder is guaranteed a roster spot because he was considered a top 100 pick by a lot of NFL draft pundits. That's not how it works. The NFL passed on this guy. And so you got to think the Broncos probably feel pretty good, especially if he doesn't do much to put tape out there in the preseason, that they would feel good about being able to get him on the practice squad and be able to develop him there, which is what I think may be the course of action, Cody, barring a breakout training camp, which he would need to have, depending if you keep 10 or 11 defensive backs and depending if you're okay with him maybe being a game day inactive right away. I just don't know. I don't know where I stand on that. I don't know where the Broncos stand on that, but it's going to be fun to see. Hopefully we do get to see him out there running around, making plays at training camp.
Well, and look, right now, safety of Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson, P.J. Locke, Caden Stearns, Damarri Turner-Yell, who actually, in my opinion, sir, I thought he had a very, very solid offseason program at OTAs and minicamp. That bodes well for him the more time he's on the field. And look, it definitely for a guy like DTY, who we felt like, okay, hey, he's gonna have a lot to prove, especially with them bringing back Kareem. But also, I think this maybe has more of an impact on JL Skinner and his potential status, where he very well, if he's not ready, if he's not healthy, he could go on one of the injured lists and maybe redshirt this season the way they kind of did with Christopher Allen last year. We'll see. And obviously, hopefully that's not the case, because you always want your guys to be healthy. And if they're dealing with something, you definitely want them to have, be able to overcome that and not rush things back there. But now let's go to the center position. Alex Forsyth, who was the Broncos' final pick in the 2023 NFL draft. I mean, honestly, we haven't heard much, right? And look, I'll tell you this, like the fact that you're not hearing much is a good sign from watching OTAs, from watching minicamp, because look, there's no pads on the offensive lineman. It's really hard to gauge maybe where they're at. I can't tell you exactly who's working at center. I know that Forsyth is one of them. Cush is another. Wattenberg is another one. And, you have other guys there, but I can't necessarily go into details about who's doing what. But it seems like right now that Forsyth is in a good position to really be the backup here to Lloyd Cushenberry this season, who is expected to start.
And you'd love to see that, right? I mean, you don't necessarily want to say, well, hey, Kyle Fuller, thanks for participating. You go ahead and we'll see you later. But again, you want the Broncos to be as homegrown as possible. And if you can hit on a 7th-round pick, that's a huge win. I mean, and it wouldn't be the first time in George Payton's tenure as GM of the team, right? I mean, I feel like Jonathan Cooper was a really good hit in the 7th round a couple of years back. And so maybe you come back around in 2023, you hit on another 7th rounder. And even if he is a backup center, that's not a bad thing, right? It's not to say, oh, that's his ceiling is backup center. A lot of times these guys are going to play one way or the other. So I just think that would be a great role for him in year one. You don't necessarily want to heap those expectations on a rookie 7th-round draft pick necessarily to say, hey, you're going to be the starter. But as we've seen, sometimes you get thrown to the yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what it is. And if you get out there and you get an opportunity, you get put through the fire, and it's like, hey, Matt Paradis, I know you were on the practice squad last year, but in a make or break, probably Peyton Manning's final year, you're going to go out there and be the starting center with no prior NFL experience. He did a great job. And so I'm not saying Alex Forsyth is the second coming of Matt Paradis, but I think, hey, you could really look at him in a similar light of saying, late round pick, a lot of college experience, really technically sound, solid athlete, nothing really wrong with his game. He just happened to fall to the 7th round. There could be a starter there. And if he's worthy of being a starter, I think being the backup center to start is a great place for him.
Now we'll see how it all plays out during NFL training camp, presumably toward the end of July. No official date has been announced by the Broncos or the NFL just yet, but when that happens, we'll have you covered every step of the way. And if you're an everyday listener, in the coming days and weeks here on the show, here's what you can expect as we figure out when training camp will start. We will have extensive training camp position previews, position by position on offense and on defense. We'll look at position battles that are ongoing there at those specific positions. We'll also look at storylines accompanying those positions exclusively, and it'll lead you right up to day one of Denver Broncos training camp, where we'll be boots on the ground every single day, giving you coverage here, Locked On Broncos, as well as milehighsports.com, as well as predominantlyorange.com. Locked On Broncos is your place to be, and thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in and rocking with us. For all you everydayers as well, what you can expect on Monday's episode of the show, Sayre and I, we're going to take a look at second-year players and maybe what are the expectations for them. For guys like Greg Dulcich, Damarri Mathis, who played a lot as rookies, we take a look at last year's draft class and we put it into perspective on Monday's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.